Thousands have been gathering all week in cities across the United States to protest the acquittal of George Zimmerman. Now, this is after a court found him not guilty of murder when he shot dead the unarmed black teenager Trayvon Martin. The ruling had set off a nationwide debate on racial hatred, as our Washington correspondent Gainesh Chikan reports.
We've seen protests in dozens of cities in the U.S. throughout the week following the verdict in the George Zimmerman case. People took to the streets demonstrating at courthouses and police stations throughout the country, demanding justice for Trayvon Martin, the 17-year-old black man who was shot dead by a neighborhood watch volunteer. Dozens of people were arrested. Most of the arrests were made on charges of unlawful assembly. In some places, like in San Bernardino, protests turned violent. Demonstrators threw rocks at passing cars. To many Americans who were following the Zimmerman trial, it's obvious that racial disparities in the application of criminal laws in America remain. All these people think, had Trayvon Martin been white, he would have been alive.
Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago. There are very few African-American men in this country who haven't had the experience of being followed when they were shopping in a department store. That includes me. There are very few African-American men who haven't had the experience of walking across the street and hearing the locks click on the doors of cars. That happens to me, at least before I was a senator.
The fact of the matter is that under Florida's Stand Your Ground law, the defense doesn't even have to prove that their client is an angel. It's enough to prove reasonable doubt that the defendant acted in self-defense, and they're free to go. So in this case, you have a clash of different issues: race, civil rights, vigilantism, guns, and self-defense laws. These people see a clash between the law and justice. A very recent example, also in the state of Florida, a black woman, a mother of 3, was sentenced to 20 years in jail because she fired a bullet at a wall to scare off her abusive husband. Nobody was injured, and the woman is in jail for 20 years while George Zimmerman walked free. So you see the basis of these people's outrage.
The demonstrators are not willing to back down, as Trayvon's parents are joined by celebrities in leading the movement. Now, that high-profile backing has given added momentum to rallies like this one that you see right here in New York. The U.S. Attorney General is urging a review of self-defense laws, while the Justice Department has relaunched a probe into the murder to see if civil rights charges can be filed against Mr. Zimmerman. RT had spoken to Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter, Bernice, who had told us that the case exemplifies rampant racial discrimination in the U.S.
The fact that had this been a white American, a white young man, I doubt very seriously that George Zimmerman would have reacted so swiftly in this situation. I think he probably would have thought about it twice. A lot of things have changed in America, so we can't say nothing has changed. I just think that we're still contending with unjust laws, and more importantly, laws that disproportionately affect African Americans and African American males more than any other group of people in America. And so, you know, these kind of issues were very prevalent in my father's time. Oftentimes you would have all white juries, and most times when there's a black victim in this case, and what I mean by victim is the one who ends up dead, 9 times out of 10 back in the 60s, or should I say 10 times out of 10, that person would have walked, just as George Zimmerman walked in this particular situation.
Despite the mass rallies, legal expert Charles Rose from Stetson University in Florida believes the chances of actually prosecuting George Zimmerman are relatively low.
If they're going to get him back in court again, it's going to be difficult to do, because the civil rights law requires that he be a state actor, and there's no indication that he was an employee of the state government during that time frame. The other option would be to charge it as a hate crime under the Shepard's Act. The problem there is that we just don't have evidence that it was hate crime motivated. If there had been that evidence, it would have been presented in the state trial that just concluded. The families have that ability to bring a wrongful death claim against Mr. Zimmerman. They could force him to testify. The problem will be that Mr. Zimmerman probably does not have much in the way of assets, so they would wind up spending a great deal of money for very little result. The relative ease with which you can not only purchase a weapon, but then use that weapon to defend yourself in the state of Florida and approximately 20 other states is really what led to this tragedy